Raiden Shogun is finally out, and there's a lot of surprising things about this Archon, so here's exactly what you need to know about her. From the moment you start using Raiden Shogun, there's a strange feeling about her, as if you're looking at an entirely different breed of character. She's a support, but also, for a brief few seconds, takes control of the whole battlefield and demolishes enemies in sight. She's an electro character, but that doesn't stop her from integrating into many teams and working to your favor. Most important of all, she's complex, but only on the surface level, because once you start using her, all the pieces fall into place, and you're left with a beautiful display of Archon's powers. So, what is she capable of? Well, for starters, you'll always carry around this big circle behind any of your active character, which visually keeps track of Raiden's resolve, and the more of this circle lights up, the stronger her burst becomes. Thematically, you could say this represents a clock, since it maxes out at 60 resolve, which is exact amount of minutes in an hour, and for Raiden, who's someone that's obsessed with time and eternity, fits her visual design quite well. But how do you build this resolve? Well, there's two ways. Either by using other party members' bursts, or by absorbing elemental particles every 3 seconds. And before you start unleashing everyone's bursts and building up that circle, it's important to keep a literal eye on your active character, because this is the elemental skill which will hover right above the circle, and every 0.9 seconds, if you land an attack with anybody, including deployed skills like Oz, the enemy will get slashed with Eye of Stormy Judgment. However, the reason why you want this up at all times is that it actually increases everyone's burst damage by a certain amount, depending on how much their burst costs, because the higher it is, the better the damage bonus. So with all of that said and done, once you pull out that sword at maximum amount of resolve stacks, you'll feel a surge of power kick in, and for those 7 seconds while they last, you truly get to take control of an Archon's power. Not to mention, you will also generate energy for the whole team every 1 second if you use one of her normal attacks, which is nice considering the elemental skill itself deals disappointingly a low amount of damage, whether it's the initial slash or coordinated attacks afterwards, and it feels like it's there more or less to just serve as a utility function, like enabling superconducts or by simply powering up burst damage. Oh, and if you're wondering, you cannot snapshot her elemental skill. But speaking about performance, her signature weapon, the Engulfing Lightning, almost always peaked as a top weapon of choice, especially considering it integrates extremely well together with her passive, which for every % of energy recharge after the base amount, you get additional electro damage bonus and help restore even more energy for your teammates when using Raiden's sword mode. And of course, if it's energy recharge that gives so many benefits, then you can expect the newest emblem of Severed Fate artifact set to be truly handcrafted for her, because the damage bonus she gets from the Force Set bonus directly applies to all of her normal, charged, and plunge attacks while she's in the burst mode, meaning the more energy recharge you put into her, the more the damage scales with this artifact set on all of her burst attacks. Otherwise, let's continue on to the next part, which covers everything you need to know about her team building capabilities and just how relevant she feels in today's Genshin Impact. Raiden's place in many team comps is pretty clear once you get the idea how to use her, but the way the developers have designed this next Archon is a little different than before. She's basically there to provide your team with energy while also dishing out some pretty serious damage, but these are broad roles a lot of support characters can do, which is why she has two very particular use cases. The first one being she's a support but also a quick swap character, so making sure you're using the best possible artifacts and weapons will feel rewarding and scale her power level accordingly when going into her burst mode. Which brings us to the second use case. Raiden wants you to build team comps with highest possible energy cost, and you've probably noticed this after reading walls of text on her talents, that one of the things that stand out is the importance of how many energy points your teammates' bursts cost, since not only can they deal increased damage from their own bursts when Raiden's elemental skill is active, but they also help her build resolve faster. So as an example, anyone who has 80 energy cost, like Beidou, Xiangling, or Xingqiu, they will roughly gain 23% additional damage to their burst and produce 15 resolve if both Raiden's talents are at level 8. Now compare this to a character with 40 energy cost, and these bonuses will be only half as powerful. So with all of this out of the way, many different teams were tested, some showing a lot of promise even when just using mediocre artifacts, and one of them was Mono Electro, which consists of Beidou, Kujo Sara, and a flexible support support character. Now the whole idea with this team is to first rely on Beto's strong damage output, while Sara is there to provide attack buffing, and since they both have 80 energy cost, they help Raiden with building up her resolve, while the Archon herself in return grants better energy generation. And when everything is prepped, the singular element damage during Raiden's sword mode is pretty amazing, with all things considered how Electro is weak compared to other elements, which is why Eula's physical team is the next one that deserves a mention. Using both her and Rosaria, which have 80 energy burst costs, along with one other support, has shown really amazing results, especially because Eula's problematic burst cost kind of forced you to add Diona into the team, but with Raiden's strong ability to supplement energy, you can adopt a different approach and instead rely on supports with better damage capabilities. Lastly, some other well-known teams were tested as variations with Raiden, which includes Child and Xiangling duo with Bennett, national team that replaces Chongyun, and the well-known Sucrose Taser comp, which actually functioned quite well with Xiangling included. Basically, most of the teams showed very positive results, and the few ones mentioned here came out at the top. However, it's important to acknowledge that there is a good number of comps you can add Raiden Shogun into, even if there is that specific use case for getting better results with higher energy cost teammates. But in reality, if you struggle with doing a full rotation of bursts off cooldown, Raiden might just help you out with this issue big time. Talking about Raiden's gameplay and team building is what you would usually expect, but this time around, we are looking at an Archon, which we haven't had a new one for 9 months, so naturally, we need to see just how well does she fare against the other two. Now, one thing that clearly stands out about Raiden is that you're going to need to invest into her significantly in order to see some returns, unlike Venti and Zhongli, where the Bard could be used as a cheap crowd control for enemies, while the Geo Archon would protect you from the world's harm by feeding him unneeded health artifacts. And let's not forget they both still deal pretty nice damage, especially Venti, but the cost to get them up and running is completely different from Raiden's, since when she goes into her burst mode, you definitely want to be causing as much damage as possible. And when speaking about damage, there is a floating thought in the community that she gets held back a little by Electro's reactions, but depending on how you would build a team together with her, this becomes rather irrelevant in situations like Mono Electro or physical Eula comps. And to be frank, it is kind of unfair to compare her elemental alignment because the other two belong to Anemo and Geo, which not only have insanely good artifact sets, but in general, the elements themselves have been used for flexible support positions, and you could basically put Zhongli and Venti into any team comp. So when it comes to Raiden's electro elements, while the amount of team comps you can build is slightly smaller, the ones that have her in them feel empowered and even make sense thematically. In fact, it seems quite possible MiHoYo is taking a new stance on how an Archon should be viewed, as the leader of their element, strengthening their teammates who share this element. But let's forget the numbers and strategies for a moment, and just appreciate how much more tightly designed she is when compared to other two. The elemental skill acts as a powerful conduit for bursts and superconduct reactions, while her sword mode actually gives you the time to play with her, unlike Zhongli, where you usually just swap in, apply the shield, drop a boulder, and swap out, which the same could be said about Venti as well. But for Raiden's situation, just build her like your main damage dealer, or in this case, a quick swap support character, and enjoy her burst mode by decimating enemies every rotation. Now, on the topic of constellations, the first one is just confirming what has been said before. She gains 80% more resolve from Electro and 20% more from any other element, which means someone like Beto with an 80 energy burst cost will generate a massive 28 resolve instead of the usual 16 at level 10 of Raiden's talent, which more or less completes half of her prepping. So as you can imagine, this is how much more powerful Mono Electro becomes just from this constellation alone. But the hype doesn't just end here. Her second constellation will shred 60% of enemies' defense when using her sword mode, which also includes the initial slash, and you have to understand just how insane this is, because not only does reduced defense give some of the best damage output for you, but there's only few characters in the game who are able to do this. Now, interestingly enough, The fourth constellation isn't that big of a deal, since it basically grants 30% increased attack to other teammates once her burst mode ends, and while the number in itself sounds nice, it doesn't provide a drastic improvement when compared to Bennett's or Kujosara's attack boost, or for this matter, Unrefined Wolf's Greystone can do the same, even if it works a little differently. Finally, looking at her last constellation, well, honestly, it's kind of insane because what it basically does is it allows you to reduce your whole team's burst cooldown by up to 5 seconds if you manage to successfully land her attacks in sword mode. Still, if you had to pick a stopping point, then second constellation would be a nice place to settle, but going for the third one also means having stronger burst mode, and other than that, Raiden truly feels like an Archon that deserves to lead the electro element, and her constellations also give her insane boosts, especially the first two ones, so it's pretty much clear she's going to remain relevant for a long time. You could say that this Shogun is the epitome of all the character designs we've seen so far. She's got insanely beautiful animations, her skill kit is very interesting, which provides engaging gameplay, and there's also the fact she's an Archon, so a lot of people will get excited just for this thing alone. Overall, one of the biggest selling points to use Raiden over someone else is her ability to generate energy consistently, thanks to her awesome sword mode, which will help alleviate those energy issues for characters with especially high burst costs like Xingqiu or Xiangling. And if we're on the subject of supporting, not only can she do that quite well with her elemental skill by enabling easy superconducts and increasing everyone's burst damage, but you also finally get to take control of an Archon and feel their power by using her burst mode instead of just swapping in quickly like you would with Zhongli or Venti and then swapping out. But you know this next part's coming and it's unavoidable, so when we have to talk about some of her drawbacks, one of them has to be the abysmally low damage she produces with her elemental skill, which is kind of sad, especially considering this is Electro we're talking about. Even if overload or electrocharge reactions can be caused, they still get overshadowed by melt and vaporize, so it's disappointing developers decided not to increase the raw power of this skill. The other drawback would be the actual entry point to building her. Not only does she have one artifact set that outperforms all the other ones, you also need to invest quite a few resources into her, which includes stacking energy recharge to a certain point before you can see some results. Of course, you could just put her into a Eula team for superconducts and call it a day, but we are here to witness her slaughtering in sword mode, and to see those big damage numbers, you need decent artifacts, which more or less have to be from the Emblem of Severed Fates set. Still, even with all of this out of the way, what personally feels like her biggest achievement is the fact she is starting to push Electro into the spotlight, and she truly feels like an Archon that will lead this element for greater heights, and potentially make more players consider using characters like Beto, Fischl, and Lisa, as well as future ones that will be coming out. Hope you enjoyed this video and you get lucky with pulling this new amazing character. Special thanks goes to MiHoYo for providing some of us content creators with a media server where we could test out these new characters before they went live. Although keep in mind the artifacts provided weren't in the most optimal shape, and you can definitely expect to see an even better showcase on the main account for Raiden's build video. So make sure to support the channel and subscribe to it if you haven't already, and more importantly, don't forget to gently press that like button. Thanks for watching and see you very soon.